Hello and welcome to this retrospective on White Dwarf number 289. This was my first ever White Dwarf, the first entry point I had to the hobby, and so I thought it might be interesting to do a video about. This first came out in January 2004, just after the release of the Return of the King game, and it's a blast from the past. Apologies, by the way, that things look a bit shiny. These pages are surprisingly glossy, and I didn't have much time in which to film this. So if this video is popular, if you like it, then I will try and film a better version with perhaps another one of the vintage White Dwarfs that I have, because I have quite a few of these. Skipping over a couple of pages here, including a release of the Tau Orca dropship and a review of the most recent Grand Tournament, you'll find the release of the latest models at this point in time, which included the Catachans, pretty much unchanged in their lineup up until now, apart from a couple of special characters. I love these models. Then we're into the meat of the White Dwarf. There's a bit of lore here about one of the rune fangs, one of the legendary swords of the Empire. This is pretty much just text with a couple of pictures. It's very lore dense. Over the page here, we have a bunch of Emperor's children in an army showcase, and I remember seeing this at age 13 and kind of being shocked that there were boobies in this magazine, and yet, it was horrifying, because of course, it's Slaanesh. If you can manage the balance of tits and horror, that's Slaanesh. And looking at these conversions now, yes, they're dated because of the models that were used, but they still look great. It's so distinctive. I always loved the demonettes with the tentacle hair, a bit like Kit Fisto from Star Wars in his race. Skipping over the latest Black Library releases, we come to a bit more Empire content, which is the Cult of Ulric army list. All the rules here from, I'm not actually sure which edition of Warhammer Fantasy was active at this point, but if I skip ahead through the listing to an example army, we'll find the army associated with Boris Todd.
Where is he? I heard Kazakh one-leg on the prowl!
Unbelievably, a character that I have only recently become aware of, thanks to Ben and Tom from the Yogscast and their Total War streams, and have in fact cosplayed myself for a music video, is featured in the very first White Dwarf that I ever owned. Weird coincidence. But going over the page, we come to my favourite sections of these old White Dwarfs, the listings of all of the models that were used in the previous section. So here you have units that you can buy, like Soldiers of the Empire, Empire Militia, but next to it we also have the individual components that you can order, such as a specific bugle for 50p, or a head for 50p, or Middenheimer Champion 1 arm for £1. Skipping over a couple of pages, the events diary, what's going on, again a thing that I wish they brought back. There's a version of Chapter Approved, this time about the Demon Hunters. Some of the answers here are very blunt. And then we have news from Fnatic Studio, which is the part of Games Workshop that handled the specialist games, such as, in this case, Blood Bowl, Battlefleet Gothic, and also Necromunda. In fact, looking at the bottom left of the page here, you can see the websites for all their games supported at the time, which included Warmaster, Battlefleet Gothic, and Epic 40,000. Systems that I've always wanted to try and never have. Over the page again, there's a bit more lore to do with the Empire, this time to do with the Troll Country and some fantastic Blanche-style artwork. I don't think this actually is John Blanche. There's a list of all of the stockists, and then a review of a Warhammer tournament with... Goodness me, looking at these pictures just makes me nostalgic. These fantastic armies. The one they have here is the Chaos Army, and then on the other side we also have the Lizardmen Army. Lizardmen are probably my favourite fantasy army, and if I were to ever try and get a retro army, it would be these guys. I also love how dated the terrain is in these pictures, just how bare bones and basic the hobby was back then. We have so much now that we take for granted, including amazing terrain. And then over the page we have another article that I pulled over so many times. This time it's modelling some veterans, Imperial Guard veteran squads, using the then brand new Cadian's sprue, and mixing that with components from other sprues such as Space Marine bolters. There's even some stuff from a steam tank in here, some fantasy components, and the new Catachans. Again, something that has pretty much persisted throughout White Dwarfs, but what they're missing is the page that follows, where you can get all of the individual components. Also, looking through the Battle-Hardened Warriors section here, all of these metal models that you just don't see anymore, the individual troopers that were £2.50 each. Then there's a preview for the Brettonians, RSVP, along with a short story and some pictures. This, incidentally, was as much hype as factions got back in the day. We don't have all these fancy Warhammer previews on Twitch and the websites. This was what you got, and you were glad of it. And then there's a brief profile of Commander Farsight, which, if you turn over the page, actually includes a version of the Tau Empire as it was then. So this is relatively recently after the Tau were released. And then Commander Farsight's profile as it was in 3rd edition at this point. Over the page again, and we have another classic article. This time it's by a guy called Mike Walker, and this is basically a comedy article talking about how to do dice rolling in Warhammer. This thing is packed full of jokes that I remember at the time thinking were very funny. Some of them are, to be fair, but some of them have definitely not aged as well, or perhaps I've just grown up a bit. I think I've only ever seen 2 articles in this style in White Dwarf, so I guess it didn't quite catch on, but I'm glad that they included these because it certainly introduced to me as a kid a different side of the hobby where it wasn't all grim, dark and serious. It was just silly and fun, and I felt like that's the part of the hobby I enjoy the most. Then we have a showcase of Golden Demon winners, which is somewhat confusingly called the Heavy Metal Showcase, Heavy Metal being the in-house painting team. And it's really interesting to see how the style of painting has evolved over the years. Just as the style of the magazine has, so too is what's been in fashion. There's lots more big, blocky, bright colours here, and the tools being used are just a lot more primitive. Speaking of tools, over the page you have hobby equipment, and this includes stuff that dates back even further, such as the really old, to me at least, I'm sure there was a previous version, colour spray cans, and what I remember as being the start collecting sets when I got into the hobby, the Warhammer Warriors and the Unipose Space Marines. And then, of course, we come to the battle report. As I've mentioned in a previous video, this was the battle report that really got me into playing Space Marines. The 2 armies here, both being in power armor, was just so cool to me as a kid. And I really miss the style of battle report that they have here, where you really got a sense of what the players were thinking. Obviously, you also get fantastic close-ups of the models, and you can tell they are their armies. They're not just the studio's armies, which I really personally prefer. But each turn, they're meticulously explaining what their thought process is, whether that's the deployment or within a turn, taking it in turns to describe the action and the thought processes behind it. To me, this is the way I love my battle reports to be. I like to be able to sit down and read it over the course of perhaps an hour, maybe, rather than just skimming through in basically 15 minutes. This battle report seared into my mind. It made me want to collect Space Wolves, but not Space Wolves, hence me creating my own chapter, so I didn't have to worry about all the fancy rules. And of course, what helped with that was the listing. Again, another example of basically White Dwarf trying to sell you stuff, but for some reason I don't particularly mind it. And perhaps this is the 2-page spread that I remember most clearly, in particular looking at the Predator and thinking just how cool and modern and angular it was, just how dangerous it looked. And then we come to the final section of White Dwarf. Back in the day, it used to have its own Lord of the Rings section at the back, because this was relatively soon after the movies came out. Here we have the new releases for the Lord of the Rings, as well as showcasing the collection of Rohan and Gondor, with a very tired-looking Gandalf. There's a custom scenario, because Lord of the Rings originally was much more of a narrative system. It was more RPG than it was a game system like Warhammer 40k. And then another double-page spread that I really clearly remember, this time looking at the Warriors of Minas Tirith. I remember following this exact painting guide to the T when painting my Warriors of Minas Tirith, and it somehow just didn't look quite as good. Possibly because I was 13. We have the same again for the Mordor Orcs, and then another scenario, this time part 4 of a multi-part series, and then some special rules about fighting battles in Mordor. Some of these rules are great. I love the fact that some of them are direct quotes from the source material. Also, the very air you breathe is a poisonous fume. Everybody just takes a strength 1 hit. It's brutal. Then there's a guide to building some Osgiliath ruins, and I never understood why the table here was so big for so few models. Why did it need to be that big? And then another scenario, I think that's 3 for this issue. And finally, a review of the forces of Gondor. What was good and what wasn't. Well, I say finally. We go to the very back of the issue. You have the releases. And wow, 20 Ulric High for £12. What, you wouldn't get that these days. And in fact, you can see the full range of models available for the Lord of the Rings. Incredibly, it all fit onto just one column. And that's it. We end with another teaser of the Brettonians. This was a very different video to the kind of thing that I upload on this channel, and frankly I upload anywhere. If you found this interesting, I have plenty of old issues of White Dwarfs back at home that I can go through as well. So let me know what you thought in the comments, if you perhaps have a particular issue that you'd like me to look through, what you'd like more of, what you'd like less of, and yeah, that's it from me. Thanks very much for watching. Pop it a like if you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.